What is up, ladies and gentlemen of YouTube? My name is Oxtane, and today we finally have the all-encompassing Resto Shaman TBC guide for Phase 1 for PvE. I'll probably have a PvP guide out probably around the time I release Season 1, maybe a little bit after, based on what I've done on the beta, what I'll do at that point into TBC. So look for that at around that time. So this one is strictly PvE at the current time. So we're going to touch upon a little bit what we did in the last two videos. The first one, which was gearing in Phase 1, things like that, and then this one is also bouncing off of what I did in the last one, which is the pre-patch changes, what changes about Resto and TBC. That was a more general, like what changes specifically in the pre-patch, which is the new talents and some of the other things, as well as just like a raw buff because of those. This one is more the abilities you get in TBC, things like that. So let's go ahead and get started. So first, we're going to break down all the new abilities. Now, I did get into some of these in the pre-patch video, but a lot of these aren't available in the pre-patch because you get them from leveling. So the first one and the most obvious one is Bloodlust. And by the way, I'll have a link to this Google Sheet down below in the description. This is pretty much a culmination of a lot of different guides and things that I've done in my own research or found online in one like easier to read, hopefully easier to digest a sheet with a lot of external links to gear, professions, talents, things like that embedded in it for you guys to check out. So I hope you guys find this helpful. I mostly made it for myself because it was helpful, but I also knew that I wanted to make a video on it, so I figured, you know, kind of killed two birds with one stone, and we'll be able to help out other people as well with that. So hopefully you guys find it useful. So anyway, yeah, getting into the abilities. So Bloodlust, you learn Bloodlust at 70, so while you're leveling and stuff, you won't learn it or anything. But Bloodlust is definitely OP. Now, the main difference from Bloodlust that a lot of people may be familiar with like retail or later expansions is, one, it doesn't give sated at all. So instead, the ability itself has a 10-minute cooldown. So either you can rotate in shamans for lust if you're really wanting to be big brain sweaty. Obviously, they changed the engineering drums to have the tendinitis debuff, which is 2 minutes, but we'll get into that a little bit later. But Bloodlust has no party-wide CD. It's just the CD of the ability, right? So theoretically, if you really wanted to sweat, you could rotate in shamans for Bloodlust for a specific group. But all in all, is that really worth it over just having everyone in every party lust at the same time? No, not really. So I don't really see that happening a lot, but I guess it is a possibility for parcel lords. So with that in mind, it's also party wide instead of raid wide. So just like Totems in Classic, it is a party wide ability. So that's also something to be aware of as well. So shamans have to basically lust at the same time for when people want to lust. Maybe you coordinate different lusts depending on what group you're in. Those are all things that are in between, like what you and your raid leader decide and things like that. Second ability is Earth Elly. So this is a pretty useful cooldown. It pretty much works exactly like it does like in retail if you've played Shadowlands or recent expansions. You know, it just taunts like stuff around it. And it has a pretty decent amount of health, and you can honestly heal it like pretty well and just let it tank stuff while you like kind of DPS. It works really well. Now, well, in retail, it will like basically taunt everything in an area. In TBC, based on what I did in the beta, it pretty much, instead of taunts everything around it, it will pretty much actively seek out any enemy. So even if you're not attacking something, like you kill a mob, you have your totem, your Earth Elly down, and you kill that mob, it will like go like halfway across the zone to find the next mob it can to kill. So you need to be ready to like totemic call if it like is about to pull some crazy shit, because I've had both this and Fire Elly, which we'll get into, do the same thing, where they just like actively seek out enemies and just like try to kill them. So that is something that you definitely want to be aware of with this ability. But it doesn't hold great threat, like, because it doesn't do a ton of damage. So if you're constantly doing damage to the mob that it's attacking, like, it, you know, it will eventually like lose aggro, and then it will actually gain it back when it taunts, but it pretty much only has threat like every time it taunts. So it's not a great reliance, but it can help, like if your tank dies or something in like a dungeon group and you have this. I think you learn it at 64 or 66, I can't remember. So, you know, about halfway through you might learn it, if you even go back to learn abilities. I mean, I guess that's a whole different thing entirely. But so that's that. Earth Shield we already talked about in the last video. It's really useful, and we'll kind of get into you know, depending on like a little bit later, we'll get into when exactly to use Earth Shield on what target, like yourself, a tank, a DPS. We'll kind of get into that stuff a little bit later. As far as anything else is concerned, really it's pretty much you know, it's just a really good ability to have for sure. Most of the time you're not going to want it on yourself because Water Shield's pretty OP, but there are fights with a lot of knockback, like Curator in Kara, for example, is definitely one of those fights that you would want Earth Shield on. So we already talked about this one a little bit. So Fire Elly, much the same, but it is a massive DPS cooldown. Now each one of these is, I think, 30 minutes. It might be 20, or yeah, it says on the tooltip, I'm stupid, 20-minute cooldown for both of these. So Fire Elly is insane. It's a major DPS cooldown. Basically it's like if you took Magma Totem and Fire Nova Totem and you like put them on crack. Like it's basically that in a DPS cooldown. Like it's a huge AoE cooldown, but even in single target it's insane. Like if you pop Lust, Fire Elly, like dude, you can just go to town. Like it's actually insane how much damage you do. So it is just a massive cooldown. I think you learn Fire Elly at 60, it's either 66 or 68, so it's pretty late. But man, it's an insane DPS cooldown. Totem at Call, now we do get this in the pre-patch, which is really nice, which obviously just lets you replace your totems, which is really nice for dungeon groups with like pats and stuff. So you don't really have to like worry about replacing your totems to not pull pats. Like you can literally just press one button and all of them go away, which is super nice. And it regens a fraction of the mana too, which is always nice. It's not super noticeable. It's really not that good in that aspect, but it's still something, right? Wrath of Air Totem. Now this one is really awesome. We finally get, you know, like the caster version of Wind Fury. I mean, it's not really Wind Fury because it doesn't like give an extra attack or whatever, but you know how Wind Fury buffs melee, like Wrath of Air will buff casters, and obviously it's an air totem, so it takes up that same slot. So we finally have something other than Tranquil to drop for caster groups, which is really nice, or the healer group, which is always good. So yeah, it's 101 spell damage and healing. So either as a healer group or a DPS group, it's good for both. And obviously this, and if you're Elly, a Totem of Wrath would be 2 separate slots. So that's like double insane for caster groups. So really nice. Obviously this, I think you get also a little bit later into the 60s. I think it's actually, it might even be like 62, 64. It's not super late. But nevertheless, don't get it in a pre-patch, so pretty sad. And then Water Shield finally, which we also don't get in pre-patch. Obviously this is at 62, so you get this pretty quickly. So not only does it generate an insane amount of MP5, but it also regens a lot of mana when you are hit, right? Which is big. And on top of that, it's also spammable because Water Shield itself costs no mana. So you can, if you're getting constantly hit, like I've had it happen a lot in arenas on the beta where I get hit and like a hunter pet's on me and I just keep spamming water shield and I'm like and I just like regen a bunch of mana because the hunter pet's just hitting me, right? So like stuff like that, like water shield is probably the biggest ability that we get in the game, like debatably. Like it's actually insane, especially for Resto specifically. It's a game changer for sure. So that's all fun. So those are the new pretty much abilities. Some of them are Resto specific, like Earth Shield, but everything else here is class wide, including both Ellys, which is really nice. You can actually do a lot more damage as Resto because the global cast times, I guess that's another thing I can touch on before I get into the new talents and talent changes, is the global cast time of Chain Lightning and Lightning Bolt is reduced by half a second. So in the Elly tree, there is in Classic and in TBC, there's Lightning Mastery that reduces the cast time by a second in Classic. In TBC, that becomes half a second with 5 out of 5 in it. So it's still the same cast time as Elly in Classic, but it's half a second off for enhancement and Resto, which is actually a huge deal. So that's a pretty nice change in and of itself. Okay, so new talents, changes. I already went over pretty much all of these in the pre-patch video, so I'm just kind of gonna blaze through these. So Healing Grace is really more applicable in PvP than anything else, just because not because of the threat, but because of the chance to get dispelled, which is actually pretty big, like actually massive. So that's something that you definitely so that's something that is a pretty big PvP talent, but not as big in PvE. Focused Mind, again, there are some fights in PvE that it's going to be applicable, but all in all, like, it's a very, very good talent in PvP, which is just a chance to reduce silence and interruption mechanics by an additional 30%. Nature's Guardian we already touched on a little bit as well, which is pretty much, you know, we went over it in the pre-patch video, but 50% chance to heal 10% of your total health. Now this one's actually really good in PvE as well as PvP, and I would say overall you really don't need any threat talents at all in TBC for the most part, but on some of the trash packs in Kara it's kind of nice based on personal testing. Speaking from personal experience, getting clapped at certain points just because you're like going big dick healing. So, and this in the pre-patch for Saf is like massive too, Nature's Guardian. So and then Nature's Blessing already touched on. 30% of your int is converted to healing, which is fucking insane. And then improved chain heals, also massive, but pretty self-explanatory, that we went over before. And then Earth Shield, which we already covered. So now we will move on to the talent builds. Okay, so for talents, let's get into talents a little bit because it's definitely interesting. So the first build is kind of like a progression, survivability, like weird, like it's mostly pretty much deep resto, but instead of taking 5 out of 5 in ancestral knowledge, you take like a little bit reduced in your, it really could do either the first 5 skill points in Elly because it really doesn't matter, and then you take like basically spell warding 3 out of 3. This talent build, I think, like, I've seen it on a lot of websites, and so I thought I'd include it, but I don't think it's particularly applicable in a lot of ways. Some of the elemental damage is nice on some fights, but all in all, I just don't really think it's worth it that much. So moving on to the next one, we have a kind of enhancing totems build, not like Imp Wind Fury or anything like that, but this is a good general purpose build for content on farm. So you get a decent amount into enhancement, you get Imp Ghost Wolf, you get improved Strength of Earth and Grace of Air, as well as Stone Skin and stuff like that. So you go into it a little bit. So yeah. And then the last one I have here is like a deeper resto build. Now you can either put 5 more points into or not 5 more, 2 more points into resto wherever you want in the tree, and skip Imp Ghost Wolf and just leave 5 out of 5 ancestral knowledge, and then put maybe like 1 more point into crit and 1 more point into like something else or whatever you want, like improved reincarn or whatever. But I think 0754, like I think this build I have is in my opinion probably one of the better ones that you can rock in TBC. And I like Imp Ghost Wolf. For PvE it's not always applicable, but sometimes it is. It's just always nice to have, I think, just general purpose in the game, but it just kind of depends on what you want, right? So yeah. So now we get into a little bit of the gems and enchants. So a lot of these will kind of depend on like how many types of sockets. So meta gems are really weird because you need a certain type of, you know, a lot of them are like requires more blue gems than red gems, requires, you know, X, Y, and Z. Like it's basically all dependent on how many different types of gems you have will determine what meta gems you can actually use. So this is a decent one, which is just int and then chance to restore mana on spell, which is really nice because it adds up over time. There's another one that I think is like 26 healing, and then I believe it's like reduced threat or something like that. That's also a good one. There's just a lot, like it, you know, I could list them all out here, but realistically, like on the auction house you'll be able to sort through them all, and you know, you'll be able to find everything and stuff. So ultimately, like, not really worth getting into that much, but meta gems are definitely like the weird gem that you need. It just depends on what items you have and how many sockets and what type they are. Will determine what meta gems you can actually use. So there's that. Now the red gems, so there are entry level gems. Like there's several different layers of gems. There's gems that drop from heroics, ones that drop from you know, like stuff in the world. There's obviously the ones that jewel crafters make, which are like the blue and epic quality. There's epic quality just from dungeons though, or heroics. There's the entry level ones in Shatrat that are just like, you know, they're just plain like white, like vendor gems that you buy for like your starter gear or whatever because they're dirt cheap. So there's also, so I mean, generally speaking, there's red, blue, yellow gems, but there's also like green gems, purple gems, you know, orange gems. So like the orange fit into red and yellow, the purple into blue and red, I think it is. And, you know, I mean, basically, you know, and then green into, I think, blue or yellow. So like there are actually several different types, and depending on what's good for you, you may actually use like a traditional yellow gem. Now a lot of these spell haste gems, now spell haste is really good. Obviously you go faster, but in the same vein as 2.5 in classic, your throughput's just going to be a lot higher the more spell haste you have. So like a really good Priebus trinket is the Scarab trinket that I touched on in the last video, because it does give a chance to just proc spell haste on top of just being a flat 70 healing on the trinket as well. So that's always really nice. So for yellow gems, like spell haste gems are really good. There's also just plain int gems. There's int and MP5 gems. There's no real wrong answers necessarily. There's like spell crit gems. Spell crit isn't really that important though for Resto Shaman. That's probably like the least prio you should have on anything is spell crit. Like that should be the last thing you want to take. So there's a lot of different gems, and I could go on and on and on and on about gems because there's really a lot to it. But generally speaking, we'll get into stat priority a little bit later. And there's not a lot of spell haste stuff in the game in phase 1. I think it's like phase 2, phase 5 content, I think, that has a lot of that stuff. So for the beginning, really for Resto, you pretty much just want raw plus healing or int because it's also a fractional plus healing. And then like MP5 is decent, but it's about as good as it is in classic. Like it's good, but it's not amazing. So it's mostly just like raw healing and int that you really want to itemize yourself for early on. And then in the later tiers, you get into things like spell haste and stuff like that. But yeah, so that's a general overview of gems. But most of those things are going to be pretty self-explanatory because you're going to know what people have and what people want pretty early on. So yeah. Now the enchants are kind of interesting. So the Helm Enchant that's BIS comes from Thrallmar, and it just requires Revered rep, which is not going to be hard. Obviously for like heroics, you need Revered with all the reps to get the keys. Now a common misconception I will say also that isn't privy to just Resto Shaman, but just playing the game in general, is in TBC to do the heroics you need Revered to get the keys. Now everyone in the party needs the key, like you as the individual need the key from Revered to get into the heroic mode, or else you can't. There are only 2 dungeons from that I remember and that I did on the beta that require a key to get inside by 1 player to open the door, like Skolo or something like that in classic, right? But it only requires that 1 person have the key, right? And that's Arcatraz, which definitively 1 person needs the key for, because you don't actually res as a ghost. You like res on the ground outside the instance because you can only get there by flying. That's a neat little thing about all the Tempest Keep dungeons. And then the Shattered Halls in Hellfire, you can get through by dying through the gate, and then like, you know, it's like DM or Skolo or one of those dungeons in classic that you can just get in like that way. So it just kind of depends, you know. So anyway, a little side tangent aside. So Revered, Thrallmar, Glyph of Renewal, really good. Just insane Helm. So that's pretty much it. Now Shoulder Enchant's a little interesting because the whole Aldor versus Scryer thing, it really depends on like class and role and things like that. But for Resto Shaman specifically, Aldor is pretty much the way to go. And the main reason for that is the Shoulder Enchant, because the Shoulder Enchant for Scryer is not really that good, like at all. Like it's worse than the Saffron Enchant from Nacht, which pretty much the Aldor and the Saf Enchant are actually pretty much dead even, because the Saf Enchant is 31 healing and 5 MP5. The Aldor Enchant is 33 healing and 4 MP5. So like they're basically the exact same, more or less. So yeah. So depending on what you are, obviously you take that Shoulder Enchant, or you go and you farm Nax and TBC. But unless you really want to do that, or you have a couple healing enchants stacked in your bank from classic, that's actually a pretty good move too. So yeah, so that's pretty much it as far as the Shoulder Enchants. And obviously the ZG Enchant is actually still pretty good. It just obviously doesn't give any of the MP5 or anything like that, which kind of sucks. But just like as a cheap like enchant to just put on like pre-bis gear, like it's definitely a really good thing. Is the ZG Enchant still really good? So yeah, so that's something that you may be aware of for sure. So yeah. Cloak Enchant, it kind of just depends on what you're doing. Spell Pen is like okay, but that's like better in PvP. Major Armor's like not a bad option. or just like any of the resist enchants. I mean, it's pretty much just like whatever you want, honestly. Like, it doesn't really matter that much. It's pretty much the same in classic, right? Like reduced thread or whatever, like pretty much whatever you want. It doesn't really matter too much. Pretty much a player's choice is what I put. So chest enchant, there's I do not have the other ones listed here. So restore mana is not bad. It's just it's 6 MP5 to chest, which is not bad. There's also, I believe in TBC it's +6 stats to chest, I think, over +4 from classic. So that's also a really good one, not a bad option at all. There's also you know, I think I don't actually remember the other ones, but those are the two I would recommend, either the 6 stats or the mana. It just depends on play style. All right, so bracer enchant. So superior healing is really the one I would go with. The other one you can go with is 6 MP5, but again, like healing is like the #1 stat that you want to focus on for Resto Shaman, that and int really, and ideally a combination of the two in tandem works really well. MP5 isn't bad, but I remember going into classic that a lot of people and all the guides I saw and stuff were like MP5, 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 and that was like what I based a lot of my pre-bis knowledge on, was just like basically stacking MP5, and that was definitely the wrong decision. So I don't think like MP5 is really gonna be as good as a lot of guides say it is, or a lot of private server people say it is. It's not bad. It's definitely a good stat, but it's you know, it's not like the be all end all. And so next we have Glove Enchant, which there's a new one which is just 35 healing, and then the one from classic, which is still +30, is like obviously not much worse than that, and it's gonna be cheaper, just by and large, right? So that could be something that you look to put on if you're a budget Andy. So that's, you know, pretty self-explanatory there. Now Wagon Enchants are interesting. Now these are pretty much all made by tailors, so there's just the different levels of spell thread. So depending on like if you're in pre-bis versus you have like a tier thing, or you have like a crafted piece, like it may dictate on like how much you actually want to spend and what level of spell thread you actually want to put on it. I actually think this is a nice thing that exists in later expansions that doesn't really exist as much in classic, which is in classic there aren't really like a lot of budget enchants for the most part. It's pretty much just like one thing and that's it. So I think having budget enchants for different levels of gear is really nice. So these are basically just all the different versions of the leg enchants. Now Boots Enchant, so minor speed is still always good, and then there's one that also gives 9 stam with minor speed, so that one's always good. Or you could go with health and mana per 5. This is one that's actually pretty good, especially in PvE specifically. It just depends on what you're using your character primarily for, but yeah, so those are like the two I would recommend. But the vitality one's really good for sure. There's also one that is called Sure-Footed that basically will get you like out of roots and stuff like that, but that's not, again, as applicable in PvE, but that's still a really good one. So it just depends on how many different forms of content you want to do on your shaman, and that will kind of dictate what enchant you get. Weapon enchant, so the new one is +81, which is insane. And then obviously I guess if you have like a not great weapon, maybe you could put 55 on it from classic, but all in all, like even a pre-bis weapon is worth putting 81 healing on just because it's insane, right? So that's the one there. Shield enchants, And the other thing you want to remember about these enchants too is there's a chance, like I know it happened on beta, and I know beta was an interesting animal because like currency really didn't matter, like gold didn't mean anything because you could infinitely clone your character or whatever with infinite amount of gold. But there is a chance that you can sell either transmutes or primals or things you pick up like for enchants. Like a lot of people are doing that on the beta. Like I got an 81 healing enchant on the beta for like 4 primals or something. So like if you happen to pick up a lot of stuff while you're leveling, like primals or whatever, like hang on to them, and you could actually use them. Like if you don't personally need them or want them, like you can always basically trade them, even though they're not the actual enchanting mats, right? Like that's always a possibility that happens early on in the game at least. And then shield, this is why I recommended in my gearing video that you always want to shield over like just a normal offhand, is because you can't enchant a normal offhand, but you can enchant a shield, and you can either go with stam or int, but int is definitely the best for PvE. So 12 int is the way to go. But if you want to be a beefier boy, or you like also use your shaman in PvP or whatever, 18 stam is also there and really good. And then another enchant you can get if you are an enchanter only is you can get a 2-time ring enchant for plus 20 healing on each of your rings for a total of 40 more. That is something that you can do if you so choose to be enchanting, which leads us into the profession choices. Professions are a very, very, very important thing in TBC, debatably more than classic, especially considering a lot of like pre-bis or even bis gear in certain phases come from the professions that you pick. So the first one that is pretty decent is leatherworking. So you get several different pieces, which are the Windhawk pieces, which again, if you guys like want to follow along in the sheet, it'd actually be easier because you can like click on like all these items that I have on here that have the text highlighted, like the item quality color. Like these are all external links that you can look at these items on. So that's something that I included for you guys that hopefully you guys find helpful. So tribal leatherworking for Resto's the way to go. So you also get like a chest piece later on in the game that's really good. I think it's the Sunwell patch actually, so it's pretty late. And then all these sets have like set bonuses, and then obviously the big one with leatherworking is drums, which okay, people are gonna meme me because like drums of battle is obviously the popular choice. Even with the tinnitus debuff, it doesn't require everyone in your raid to be leatherworking, but you still probably want to have some leather workers. But also drums of restoration, like okay, it might be a meme, but if you're actually in a healer group, it might actually be better, especially if it's a longer fight, because basically drums of restoration will restore like health and mana like every like on its ticks. Whereas drums of battles just like spell haste, which isn't bad for healers at all, but it just depends on what group you're in your dungeon or your raid. So like low-key drums of restoration kind of sick, you know, like people can beam me for that or whatever, but hey man, it is what it is. Look, healers got a parts too, okay? So leatherworking's still really strong. Like the Windhawk stuff's really good. The chest piece is insane in Sunwell, and then obviously having drums as the utility is still needed and wanted in TBC, so that's something that is always going to be useful. So leatherworking is like a really strong profession choice, in my opinion, that I think a lot of people should go with. Blacksmithing. So blacksmithing is definitely an interesting one for Resto. Obviously for enhancement, it's kind of like the no-brainer one. Even with only being able to use one of them, it's still a no-brainer. Now blacksmithing for all of the specs like Elly, Resto, it gives good weapons. It gives Hand of Clarity, and you have to be the hammersmith to make it. Now I do have in here, so it is not purchasable from the auction house. That's actually false technically. as you can like buy it, but you do have to be, it's like the reflectors and the dragonlings and shit from classic, right? Like you have to have the skill and be in that skill, but you can't just have the profession skill up blacksmithing. You also have to be like a master hammersmith. At that point, it's like it's just cheaper if you just like learned it and made it yourself, you know? So it's like, is it really worth buying off the auction house at an inflated price? No, it's not. So it is purchasable technically. I'm wrong, but in that way. But the reason I said that is because like in all reality, like it's not really something that you're really gonna want to purchase, right? So but it also offers some other good pieces like Earth Piece breastplate, which I think is like 90 healing and like a lot of MP5. Now it's kind of like the red dragon scale breastplate from classic, where it's just like a lot of healing and like that's pretty much it. But this one's a lot of healing and a lot of MP5 and like that's it. So no int, no stam, no nothing. But for PvE, that's not always terrible. So it's still a good item. Now alchemy is another interesting one, because obviously it's nice to like be able to make your own consumes and stuff, so that's gonna be really good, especially considering that shit's gonna get expensive, especially early on if you wipe a lot and stuff like that. So that's obviously good for those reasons, and you could possibly sell transmutes and things like that. But later in the game in Sunwell, you get the Redeemer's Alchemist Stone, and this thing is fucking insane. It's like 120 healing or something like that, and increases like the effects of your flasks and potions and stuff. Like it is insane. So alchemy is like later in the game, alchemy is the way to go, bro. Like alchemy is insane. But early on in the game, doesn't really offer a lot outside of just being able to make your own stuff. But that's a decision that you can come to later, or you could level alchemy later in the expansion, which I'm probably going to do. So that's just ultimately up to you, you know. Now tailoring, probably the strongest, especially if you're more only PvP centric. Tailoring is just insane. Like it's just like you have to take it. Now I will preface that saying that it helps to have profession alts to make the Primal Mooncloth, because Primal Mooncloth is going to be expensive. It's going to be like Mooncloth, but way more expensive in Classic, where it has a couple days CD. So you want like either a couple tunes, or you're going to have to pay a ton for the transmutes, or you're just going to have to wait for all your transmutes. But like for one item, it's like 8. And I think the cooldown's like 3 or 4 days, like Mooncloth and Classic. So it's like good luck. Like at that point, you're just going to have like full tier. So it's insane. With the Primal Mooncloth set, and then the White Mend items that you can also make. Now the White Mend items are like Bloodvine, like you can use them regardless, but you get the set bonus if you're tailoring, right? Because that's how Bloodvine works. Like you don't necessarily have to be tailoring, but you get the set bonus if you're tailoring. So it's the same thing with the White Mend hood and pants. You don't actually have to be tailoring to use those, but obviously you can make them with tailoring, and you get the set bonus, which is a really good set bonus if you are tailoring. So between the Primal Mooncloth and the White Mend gear with the set bonus, that's like 5 like BIS pieces basically in phase 1 that you get from tailoring, which is insane. But it's going to cost a lot of either gold or time or profession alts. So that's something that you really want to keep in mind when you think about what's worth your time, like crafting a really good item or just farming a raid for 1 or 2 weeks and then getting an item that's like comparable, you know. Or like Doomwalker in Shadow Moon Valley like drops like a helm that's like just as good as like White Mend hood, or you know, something like that. So it's like, you know, what's really worth it, what's not. You're gonna kind of dictate those things as you go along and as you progress your character. Engineering, now I'm actually staying engineering on my shaman for a couple reasons. One, I already have it leveled from Classic. 2, you get a lot of cool utility stuff. You can also make some flying mounts, which is kind of cool, I guess. Not like huge, but it's kind of cool. You do get a lot of cool things, like you get the super rocket boots, you get like the little rocket that you see like Payo on his stream like BM people with. I mean, you know, you can just do fun stuff like that, so that's always fun. But later in the game, in phase 2, you get really good healing or enhancement or Elly, so no matter what spec you're going. Really good engineering goggles that you can make in phase 2, which is awesome. And they're insane. And then in Sunwell, you get an even better version of those that you basically upgrade those goggles into like an insane one with like 120 healing or something like that. So it's worth it in both the earlier game and the later game. So I'm personally staying engineering for pretty much most of those reasons. And then enchanting we already covered. You get the specific enchants and things like that. Also jewel crafting I don't have in here, but I will talk about a little bit. You do get like specific statue trinkets and things like that, and some of them are pretty good. Most of them are just stat sticks with like a raw on use, kind of like Toep, and then it's like a lot of int and a lot of stam. But it kind of just depends. So jewel crafting isn't bad either, and then obviously being able to make your own gems. So jewel crafting is also something that's like really good, but I didn't include it in here for whatever reason. Maybe I'll add it in here just as like a little aside, but it's definitely not a bad option for sure. So consumes, you pretty much get 2 different types of food. One is you get stamina and MP5, or you get a raw healing by 44, which is insane. So you definitely want to go for the golden fish sticks. Those are the best consumable food you'll get in the game by far. The spore fish isn't bad, but all things considered, you just want raw healing is way better, and 44 is insane. That's like another piece of gear basically almost. So yeah, really good. So the potions, so it depends on the situation. Generally you just want to use mana pots just like classic. You also can get the Mad Alchemist potion, which is health and mana, but you have to be alchemy for that, which is also really good to have on you. And then also haste potions are really good, but these are going to be way more expensive even than mana pots, because these are also really good for DPS, like casters and melee. So these are going to be way more expensive, and you don't necessarily need them as a healer. They will help your throughput for the duration for sure, but if you're then that doesn't really help you, right? And Resto Shaman, you don't necessarily go a lot, but it depends on you know, do you have a Shadow Priest? If you do, great. If you don't, you know, maybe stick with a mana potion. And then you can also use dark runes as well, in addition to these. So dark runes are still really good in TBC, so you would still want to pretty much stack as many of those as possible. Weapon oils, so it's pretty much the same as classic. It's really, you pretty much, the one from classic is the best weapon oil you can get in TBC, because there really aren't new oils, and there's one later that is basically 14 MP5, but yeah, it's not as good, right, as the classic one. So I would recommend the classic one. Is still the best one you can really do in TBC. Now elixirs and flasks, so a change that you will find out in the pre-patch, as they keep delaying it today when I'm recording, waiting for the server to come up. So you can use either a flask, which will count as both of your elixir slots, or you can use 2 elixirs, a guardian and a battle elixir. Now the trade-off of these is that flasks generally are probably going to be more expensive as an individual unit, but they obviously persist through death. So distilled wisdom is still really good. It's kind of nerfed because it's 65 int as opposed to 2k mana, but obviously with the talent you also get about 20% of that in raw healing. So distilled wisdom's still really the best flask for you. because there is a 25 MP5 flask, but Distilled Wisdom's just better in my opinion. Like it's more it is a little bit of healing, and it's just going to be better than 25 MP5 in my opinion. But either one's fine. But yeah, Distilled Wisdom's still really good, especially if you're progressing like earlier into TBC. The earlier into TBC you are, the first week or week 2, and you're progressing into all the content, the classic flasks are still going to be insanely good, especially considering people are going to be wiping a lot because people aren't going to know the mechanics. You're not going to be as geared. Heroics are going to be fucking brutal the first like couple weeks when people don't have gear. They're going to be the hardest content in the game, and you're going to die a lot in heroics like early on. So having like the classic flasks or just a flask in general is more worth it early on than it is later. Later in the game, I'd say it's more worth it to use Elixir of Healing Power and then Drainic Wisdom or Major Mage Blood, but I like Drainic Wisdom just for the int, and then obviously plus 50 healing on Healing Power. So combination of those two is really good, but Distilled Wisdom is going to be cheaper overall probably. It's also really good, and early on in the game, like I said, using a flask that persists through death, especially in heroics early on, is going to be massive, I think. So that's kind of my recommendation, is I think go with a Distilled Wisdom or even Mighty Restoration if you want early on. First week of Kara, second week of Kara, doing heroics. Once the content gets easier, once people get more gear, then getting into the other elixirs and the food and everything and reconsuming like will be more worth it, because you won't really be dying, so you won't be burning through those consumes. Because between spending it on epic flying and everything else, like, and all the mats and all the profession stuff, like, man, you're gonna make a lot of gold in TBC, but you're gonna sink a lot of gold too. So that's like definitely a big thing that people want to be aware of. It's just knowing how to manage your gold early on so you just don't run dry, because it's going to be really easy to get run dry really quickly, especially if you want to get epic flying in that first week. So here we get into some more specific stuff like totems and things like that. So obviously in TBC, gone are the days of being a Wind Fury simp Andy like me and being Imp Weapon Totems Resto and Classic, because Enhancement Shaman and Resto and Elly all have like different things that they bring to the raid. So melee are going to get buffed by Enhancement, ranged are going to get buffed by Totem of Wrath, and Elly Shamans, and then healers and other people or other leftover casters that don't get Totem of Wrath will go into like a Resto group. So generally, I'd say most raids and a good raid comp to have is a shaman for each group. So that's 5 shamans, usually about 2 enhance, 2 resto, and 1 Elly. But there is obviously some different things in that. Or you might not even have 5 shamans total, which means obviously even if you're resto, you might have to be dropping Wind Fury still or something like that, right? So it really depends on your group composition. Ideally, as a Resto Shaman, you should be in either a caster DPS group, or you should be in the healer group with like a Shadow Priest or something like that. I know I have a friend that's maining a Shadow Priest in TBC, and I'm super happy because of the fact that it just the insane mana regen that Shadow Priest gives. And if you can like stack 2, we did that in a Kara on the beta, and it was even more insane. So definitely try to get in a Shadow Priest group if you're a shaman, because it's going to help your mana regen a lot. Like it's going to like have your mana like at the rate that you go through your mana. Like it's actually insane. So yeah. This is kind of just like a breakdown of what totems you would drop and what scenario. It's pretty self-explanatory stuff. I don't really need to go over it. You guys can read over it, stuff like that. So obviously like melee, Wind Fury, Grace of Air, depending on whatever. Now the one thing I will say that for those of you that don't know, obviously Pally tanks come into TBC. Pally tanks are interesting from a Resto Shaman perspective, because normally you know, you get like a warrior tank or something like that, you drop Wind Fury. If you get a bear tank, maybe you drop Agi. You get a lot of hunters, you drop Agi. But Pally tank, you drop Wrath of Air because they kind of balance the spell power. So the best totem you can drop for a paladin tank is Wrath of Air. So that's something that you want to keep in mind, that I learned from the beta, because initially when I played on the beta, I was dropping Wind Fury, and then I kind of realized, like, wait a sec, like Wrath of Air would probably be better, and it is. So that's one of those things that I didn't even know until I got into the beta. So like I've definitely learned a lot about those areas, like little weird things that you don't really remember from back in the day, because I was like 10 years old when TBC came out, and I like wasn't even level 70, so or I wasn't even level 60 before TBC came out. So yeah, so pretty much you know, you can go down the list or whatever, right? And obviously no Totem of Wrath because we're not Elly. So yeah, Fire Totem is always kind of just like a wild card, like so yeah, you can kind of read through those and whatever. Now the down ranking spells, I touched on this a little bit in the pre-patch video. So what's interesting about the down ranking spells is that you still want to use rank 1 occasionally. It's still very mana efficient, but your throughput isn't going to be as high. Generally, I feel like a good balance I've struck is either rank 3 or 4 is pretty good, and then usually 4's a lot better. And then if you're in a Shadow Priest group, most of the time you can just spam max rank and be fine. But other than that, you kind of want to down rank to either 3 or 4. Maybe down the stretch of a fight where you're starting to like struggle a little bit more on mana. That's kind of what I found in my Kara, is like I could start off rip and just be pumping heals, like especially at damage intensive parts. And then as the fight went on and I was like starting to go I would go to like rank 3 or 4 chain heal. But you always want to rank 1 just because it's still useful to have on your bar. Now healing wave is interesting. If you go into healing way, which I would recommend, especially considering the buff cap isn't like as really a thing in TBC, always keep a rank 1 on your bar so you can basically just spam it and get healing way stacks, especially in a more single target fight like Prince in Kara, for example. Like is a fight that you're pretty much just going to be spamming healing wave on the tank. It's not really like an AoE healing fight, so you pretty much would like pre-pull. You would go maybe do it on patchwork too, like in classic. Like it's the same kind of thing. You just, you know, you get 3 stacks of the healing wave built up, and then you know your healing wave is buffed. You can pretty much max rank pump for the most part, but it does chunk your mana. So I also think like rank 8, 10, and 12 I've all used at different parts. Like those are really the main 3 I've used on the beta. I think 10's pretty good, or 11 even. But generally speaking, like, yeah, you don't want to max rank a lot in TBC. Like it's, for the most part, you pretty much just want to spam max rank. But I think like rank 10, 11 healing wave is good. And then 12 when you're big pumping, and then lesser, you get 1 additional rank, so it goes up to 7. So you would pretty much want 7, and I think either 6 or 5 is fine. All right, and then finally the last part I have here, and then we'll kind of wrap things up, is gearing, which I touched in my first video, and if you guys haven't seen that, make sure to watch the first video. I also made several different pieces on 70 upgrades, sets of gear that I would recommend people have as just like starter gear that you can look at for pre-bis or whatever. I've also linked a couple other sources and stuff that I think are useful. And then the general stat prio. So as I said before, it's healing is like the best thing. Int, because spell haste is like very rare to come by in before phase 2 or tier 5. So for phase 1, it's pretty much healing, int, MP5, and then spell crit would be like the order of importance. So that is pretty much what you want to aim for as far as your sockets, your enchants, things like that. What you want to aim for is it's not bad to have a lot of pieces in PvE that have like maybe just raw plus healing and then like MP5 and like no int or whatever. But it just depends on your mana regen, your MP5, things like that. Like if you have less int, you probably want more MP5 as opposed to more raw healing. So if something doesn't have int on it, you probably want MP5 on it instead in place of that. If it doesn't have MP5, you want int on it. So that, you know, they kind of play off each other, where you're not always going to have items with like the ideal stats. So bouncing off one another is like int and MP5 really, but then plus healing's like the main one that you want to shoot for, right? So that is pretty much everything I think I got to for the most part. Again, I will keep this sheet updated as TBC progresses. And this is a PvE one. I will have a PvP one out probably a couple weeks after launch. I'm actually going on vacation like later in the week, and then I actually won't be back until like a week and a half after TBC launches. So I actually won't be there for TBC launch, which really sucks. But it is what it is, you know. So you know, I'll be back streaming, doing YouTube stuff like probably the second week of June, mid second week of June, third week of June, around that time. And yeah, so that's when I'll pretty much be doing everything. And then I you know, shameless plug at the end, and then I pretty much have links to all the guides that I accumulated in this sheet. So shout out to all the people that made those guides. So like I said before, this guide is available for you guys in the video description. It is a Google Doc that I will link. And let me know what you guys thought, if this was helpful for you, and then I will be back probably in a couple weeks. I have a classic PvP montage that I'm working on that I've accumulated clips all over classic. It's now that classic is pretty much officially at an end. I will be releasing that as soon as I can, because that was kind of one of the goals I had for classic. So I'll be releasing that. And then after that, I'll have some PvP videos, and I'll probably put out like some Karazhan and Mag and Gruul's Lair stuff, probably a little bit after launch as well, once I get my feet wet in those. I've already done them on the beta, so if you guys are curious what that's like, I have a full Kara, I have Gruul's Lair, and then I have Mag's Lair all on my Twitch on the beta as a Resto Shaman. I also did a Kara as a Holy Pally too. So I have all those VODs on my Twitch if you guys are interested in how those went and how they felt. Feel free to drop any questions on my Twitch, in the comments below, whatever. And the support lately has been really awesome, from the Asmon tourney to all the other stuff that I've done. So hopefully TBC continues to be an awesome experience, despite there being a store amount and, you know, $70 to play the game and whatever. But that's a whole different rant for another time. But thank you guys so much for watching. I really do appreciate all the love and support that you guys give. And I will be back in a few weeks, most likely, for more content. So I hope you guys enjoy TBC launch. I hope you enjoy pre-patch, because I really don't get to, but I hope you guys do. And I will catch you guys in TBC. So have a good one. Later.